Hello, and welcome to the AAMFT podcast, your all-access pass to the latest news, developments, and thought leaders in the world of systemic therapy. We strive to relate, educate, and innovate, one episode at a time. I'm your host, Dr. Eli Karam, and we're brought to you by the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. Our podcast explores topics that relationship-based therapists care about. In addition to featuring unique conversations and interviews with established experts, our show provides information and education on direct practice and emerging trends in the MFT profession. For more information, please visit us at aamft.org. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Eli back with you on the AAMFT podcast. And today we have a double feature, two guests. A lot of times we talk about the pioneers in the field, and today is about the current leadership. I am pleased to be joined by both the president of the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, Dr. Tim Dwyer, and the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Marital and Family Therapy, Dr. Steve Harris. Both very engaging, very humble gentlemen. You'll learn a little bit about their background. Really what you will hear today in these interviews is each leader's vision for the future. Tim with AAMFT and Steve with JMFT. First, let me welcome Steve Harris. Published by the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, the Journal of Marital and Family Therapy, that's JMFT, is dedicated to both reflect and foster the best scholarship in our field that makes a difference, moves us forward as a profession, crosses borders, and of course is sensitive to cultural diversity and social justice. It's a publication relevant to both researchers and clinicians, and that's important to Steve, as you'll hear him talk about today. He received his master's and doctoral degree in MFT from Syracuse. Prior to ending up at the University of Minnesota, he was a faculty member at Texas Tech for 13 years. He's been practicing MFT for over 20. Before he became the editor of JMFT in 2018, he was serving as reviews editor from 2000 to 2005, and he's been on the editorial board since 2000. Dr. Harris is the author of over 65 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters, and he has contributed to a variety of other publications throughout his career. You may also know him as the Associate Director of the Minnesota's Couples on the Brink Project, with former guest on the podcast, Dr. Bill Doherty. All right. Wonderful to be joined by Steve Harris, editor of the Journal of Marriage and Family Therapy, also known as JAMFT, here on the podcast. First question we always ask Steve is, tell us about yourself, your journey, not only into MFT as a profession, but also into the academic side, which led you to become the editor of the journal in 2018.
Wow. How much time do I have? I was not a very good high school student. And I started in, I'm a first generation college student, so I didn't really have mentoring around how to go to college or how to sign up for this or that, and so I was all self-taught, and I didn't have a great teacher. So I would say that I took poor study skills, study habits into my college environment, and I didn't do well there. I was fortunate enough to take a break from college for a couple of years. I served a mission for my church and lived in Finland for 2 years and really learned how to learn a new language that nobody learns. Nobody learns how to speak Finnish, and realized I could study. And so I went back to college and I kind of turned my academic trajectory around. But even in that academic trajectory, I remember my senior level writing class. My paper was held up as the worst paper in class. Like the teacher read it to everybody. It was indeed the worst paper in class, and she didn't read my name or anything like that. And so I really started my educational.
You remember what the topic of that paper was? I'm sure you do.
It was an interview with someone who was an MFT, and that was the task. Was to interview someone who is doing the job that you want to be doing. So I interviewed somebody on campus who was an MFT, and it was a bad paper, but. So I started my educational career with a deficit mindset that I'm not a good student, that I don't really have much to contribute, and I'm not a good writer. And so today, to contrast where I was at one point to where I am now, after having written and published articles and books, and now editing the journal, is quite a thing. Like many people in our field, I started out thinking I wanted to be in psychology or advertising. You know, I didn't know what I wanted as a kid with a brain that was still developing, and through through luck, through happenstance, I found my way into a family science class and realized that there was this thing called marriage and family therapy, and I'm like, this is what I thought I was going to be getting in psych, and didn't really like the orientation of the more individually oriented perspective in psychology, and so went through to the MFT route and got a degree in family science as an undergraduate, and then went on to get my master's degree and PhD at Syracuse University. My plan was to go and to get a master's degree, return home from the East, and set up a practice. But when I was at Syracuse, I had an assistantship in the counseling center, and I was doing my practicum in the community. And so there were some weeks I was doing 20, 30 hours of clinical work, and it was
full-time clinical work.
And it was too much. And I remember coming home and just being kind of mush-brained, and like my wife would be like, "Hey, you're home, we can talk." I'm like, "I'm done talking. You know, I just want to escape for a little bit." So I knew that while I enjoyed my clinical work and thought I had a talent at it, I knew I didn't want to do that exclusively. And so the decision was made to go focus on a PhD and to get my research skills up and my writing skills up, and that's kind of how I got into this track. And now I love what I do, and I love the lifestyle that I have with, I can meet with a student, I can write an article, I can, do supervision, I go to a meeting, and I, do a variety.
One of the things about you, I think, that sticks out, one of your common factors, is you are very humble, and you're telling this story of starting kind of failure-driven, which a lot of our field is, that we come in and we experience. Many students listening to this podcast or young professionals know what it's like to fail clinically or to not do your best and kind of struggle with, is this the right thing for me? And you talk about this story of feeling that way on the academic side and then kind of rising above it. What was it that, obviously the Finland experience was important. What was it that got you over the hump, that turned you into someone that is now a scholar and an expert on other people's scholarship, so to speak?
Yeah, I don't know if I got past the hump. I think I still see myself with kind of that negative mindset. Although when I look at my Vita, I'm like, well, obviously there's something going on here. There's been publications and books that have been created and sold. People buy the book, people read the books, and I think it's been helpful to get in with good mentors, colleagues who have kind of helped me. I think it was also realizing that even if my ideas aren't the best, I have some novel ideas, and there's always room for novelty and innovation in our field. And so through some of those novel ideas, submitting a document for publication and realizing that it got published, and I was kind of surprised by that, and I thought, well, maybe I can do this, and so just having those little tiny successes, it's one of the reasons that when I work with my doctoral students, I kind of think I want them to start off with a success, so I always have them start by doing a book review and getting a book review published. I want them to see their name in print. I want them to think that this process is approachable, that it's something that's attainable, instead of thinking I've got to do an RTC and a randomized RCT, and I've got to do this. I get a huge grant. I just want it to make. I want it to be a small
success leading to a larger success.
Yeah, etc.
All right. So tell us, as many people listening to the podcast, obviously, will not go on to create original research of their own, or maybe ever submit to a journal of the caliber of JMFT. So why? And we'll talk about your vision for the journal over the next 3 or 4 years. But why is it important? If you are a frontline clinician in MFT, why is it important to read any academic journal, especially the Journal of Marriage and Family Therapy?
So I think one of the things that we try to do at JMFT is we try really hard to make research accessible to the audience, and we have to remember there are several different audiences. So there are the researchers at Carnegie One institutions that are trying to get federal funding and trying to expand their push the edge of knowledge of what we know. And so that's one audience. So we have to make sure that our articles have a scientific rigor and conform to acceptable practices within science. So it's one audience. And then we have a huge clinician base that get the journal. And they are people who have gone through their master's programs, some PhD programs. They have some knowledge of research methods, but maybe they're not practicing it and they don't swim in those waters every day. And so the articles have to also be approachable by that group of people that may have maybe less sophistication with research methods and tight controls and all the things that those mean. So those are two audiences. And another group of people that read our articles are the policy people in Washington, D.C., who look to JMFT and other forms of scholarship to help inform what gets funded, what gets prioritized at a federal level. And so that's quite a task to ask each author to kind of match your message for these three
Three very different stakeholders.
Yeah, different stakeholders and different audiences. Yeah.
And when you think of what you're excited about currently in the journal and your vision for the next couple of years, what do you want that to look like?
So I think the thing that guides me is thinking about publishing relationship-oriented clinical research. Those 4 words, relationship-oriented clinical research, has kind of become my mantra. And in talking with people about that, someone came up to me and said, is that the only thing that you'll be doing? Or is there room in JMFT for other things? Of course there's room in JMFT for other things, but I really feel like our discipline of marriage and family therapy takes a relational look at mental health problems and emotional distress, and that is our strength. And so I want to claim it. I want to grab it and stake our ground there. So to that end, we have research articles that get sent back to the authors and say, what are the clinical implications of your work here? And if they can't connect it to how the clinician might sit in their room and say, okay, I just read this article and we were just talking about this problem, and have you thought about doing X, Y, and Z with your son or your spouse? Those are the things I'd like to see. I'd like it to be translatable, and I'd like people to be able to.
Well, you're preaching to the choir. We're both MFT educators, and this idea of having the research come to life. Whenever I read something, I want it distilled down to the kind of least common denominator, and how that will help me in the therapy room with my clients, whether they be individuals, couples, or family, from this relational systemic view. So that, I think, is very important. Do you think that let me ask this way. How do you instill the value? Because my belief is, if you're not reading journal articles when you're in school, as many of our listeners are, it's going to be very hard to pick up those habits outside of there. So how do you help people, while they're still young in their formative stage, appreciate what an academic journal like JMFT has to offer?
Yeah, I think some of that is meeting the various audiences where they're at. So that means probably increasing our social media presence. We at JMFT are Amy Hubbard and myself at the University of Minnesota, plus a board of educators, board of editorial members that are all over the country and internationally, and we are in Alexandria, Virginia at AAMFT headquarters, and we are in Boston at Wiley headquarters. And so learning how to negotiate who has the say in what is the face of JMFT and what is the branding of JMFT. So we have different ways that we have to work, and how do we coordinate the efforts of the folks at Wiley with what AAMFT wants, with the academic side of what we're doing and the rigor and the scientific standards that we want to meet is a challenge as well. But I think that we need to be thinking about how do we get greater content out to people so that they can make a choice to click on the link or to move to it. And I think most of that's going to happen through social media, through email blasts, things like that. Because I don't think people, if you get the journal and it shows up in your mailbox, I don't know anybody who reads it cover to cover. Mostly, I imagine if people get it, a hard copy, they're reading the table of contents. to see if they know any of the authors or if there's any topics that fit for them. But I think finding ways to get journal content out to people. Virtual issues is one of the things.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I have been lucky enough to take part in that, one of those virtual issues a couple of years ago, and I think as an educator, if you're a student listening to this or a young professional and you want to, or not even someone that just wants to learn a new content area, talk about some of the topics of the virtual issues and how that can be good to get everything just in one place.
Yeah, so the virtual issues are similarly topicked, similar topics kind of bundled together. They reside on the Wiley JMFT website. So if you're listening, you could Google Wiley and then JMFT. You'll come up to the JMFT homepage, and you can click on the link that'll take you to the virtual issues off of the main page. I'm doing that right now.
We're doing it in real time. While he's doing that, I can also tell you if you're a member, whether you're a student member, a preclinical fellow, a clinical fellow, part of your membership comes with access to JMFT. So you can also get to where Steve is talking about, straight through the AAMFT homepage. You put in your password and you can go straight to the journal and see these virtual issues.
Yeah. So if you go to the browse link, you'll see a drop-down menu that has virtual issues on it. Right now there are about 15 entries. The topics are on things like international family therapy, infidelity, feminist-informed training and supervision, sex therapy, MFT trauma in the military, sexual and gender diversity, common factors research, supervision, solution-focused brief therapy. We need to expand this, and there's a variety of topics that I look at and I think are missing from this. Suicide, depression, anxiety, play therapy. So I've been talking to people who have expressed an interest in coming on board as virtual issues editors. And I'd really like to beef this up over the course of my tenure as the editor-in-chief. So a lot more topics. I see the audience primarily as being educators and clinicians, so educators and students, so that an educator might say, well, I'm teaching a class on infidelity this week, what do we know? And they can go, boom, right here to this this issue dedicated to infidelity.
One great way that I've used them in other MFT educators that I know is if they're teaching a class around special populations or special topics, this is built right into it. It's your whole reading list right there. So it really is a cool addition to really see the best of what the journal has to offer, spanning over the long history of the journal, both current articles and historical articles that kind of set the field in motion for some of these content areas. So if you haven't checked it out, it's a great thing to look at. What else, as far as coming up, are you excited about with the journal?
Well, actually, this virtual issue is probably the thing I'm most excited about. We also the other thing that's in the future is another effectiveness issue, and students and other people listening to the podcast will probably remember that in the 90s we started doing kind of an every 10-year update on the effectiveness and efficacy of the treatment that we provide.
Pinsoff and Wynn was the first one in 1995, and then the late great Doug Sprinkle had two more versions. So it's about time for another one.
Yeah, so we have that in the works. We've got Andrea Wittenborn and Kendall Holtrup from Michigan State University as they're going to come on as guest editors. And they'll put together the effectiveness issue that will probably debut January 2020, 21, something like that. I've got the date somewhere, but we figure we're out about 2 years away from getting that out into the mix and having that published. But so that's another thing I'm looking forward to, and we're ahead of the curve on getting things lined up.
Also, I think that's another way people outside, we're talking about if you're listening to this, you're either a member of AAMFT or you're interested in MFT. But that's another way these effective issues of people in related discipline outside learn about MFT. That is, again, as Steve was saying, a way to kind of amalgamate all the best data and what we know about the effectiveness of couple and family therapy interventions and models. So it is, if you've never checked one of those out, it's a great place. Many students, when they're doing a lit review or whatever, have probably come across those editions of those articles. So that will be published as part of the journal instead of a standalone.
Right. That's the plan right now. I haven't heard anything different from AMFT.
All right, let's talk about if you're listening to this and you talked about being, I think sometimes people don't know about maybe doctoral students, about either writing a book review or being an apprentice reviewer. So before we talk about tips of submitting on your own, if that's what you want to do, let's talk about how you could get involved in the journal.
So Dr. Lindsay Weiler at the University of Minnesota is our reviews editor. She's always looking for books to review, and like I said, part of my philosophy is to get students primarily involved in publishing and get their name on something so they can have a positive experience with that. So we're open to students coordinating with Dr. Weiler about books that they might want to have reviewed. They might even contact her and say, do you have any books that you'd like to have reviewed? Here's their areas of interest. She gets books all the time. So that's one way for students to get involved. Another way is to talk to your professors, and if you've got an idea that needs to get its way in print, talk to your professors about how do I do this, how do I go about doing this, and get involved. They're always welcome to call me. I have authors oftentimes will email me and say, I'm thinking about an article on such and such a topic. Is that appropriate? And then I go through with them the nature of their approach and how they're thinking about it, and whether it's a relationally oriented kind of a topic, and how they're going to tie that piece in. And sometimes I point people in different directions. So JMFT is not, of course, the only outlet out there. And some ideas need to be in different outlets. So.
Yeah, it could be a really good article, just not a fit for this relational frame that we've been talking about. I think so happy you shared your personal story of kind of not being a innate natural student or writer, because I think what stops many young professionals from submitting to a journal like JMFT is the fear of rejection. But this, to me, I always kind of describe it like baseball. If I get 3 out of 10, I'm an all-star. I'm in 300. So it's kind of like it goes with the territory of submitting. But talk about kind of getting over, as a young author, the fear of rejection, and then learning from a peer review process. And then we can kind of talk about some tips if we have people thinking about submitting to the journal.
Yeah. Years ago, Doug Sprinkle, who has passed, he and Fred Piercy did they wrote an article in JMFT called How MFT Authors Have Handled Difficult Rejections.
Yeah, that's a great one if you haven't read that.
They interviewed people who, prolific authors who have been rejected, and I remember them talking at a conference about it, like, some of those rejection letters, when they used to be letters that would come in the mail, they wouldn't even open, and they were so worried about it. Or they'd read the first line that says, we're sorry to say that we're not, and they just wouldn't read anything more. And then they would go back a month later and they're like, well, it wasn't that bad. And the critique that was the article had been given was actually very formative and helped them create a better article. And so, but it is difficult I think writing is very personal. So when your senior level English teacher pulls your paper out of a stack and says, this is the worst paper of everything, man, that hurts, and that sticks with you for a while. But the only way you get to be a better writer is through doing writing. And the only way that you get a different perspective on your writing is to get that feedback. So as an educator, I've had students who will say, I can't keep sending you my stuff, and it comes back with all this red ink on it. Well, so that's information that I need to hear. Like, if students are getting these adverse reactions to hearing feedback, then the feedback's not getting through. So how do I, as someone who critiques their writing, how do I give them feedback that can help them strengthen their document and help them hang in there with the process? Kind of like therapy, right? You go and you present your life before someone else, and they say, I've got some hard feedback for you to hear. And there are ways to give clients feedback that they're more willing to accept and listen to than other ways. And so how do we find that when you're putting something very personal out there for someone's critique?
Yeah, it's a beautiful parallel process between therapy and writing for a journal. The other thing that I think about, and we were also talking about at the JMFT meeting, is the idea of even great papers get a revise and resubmit.
Yeah.
Very rarely does something get accepted the first time. And if you're someone that has had success at every other level, and now you start a career in academic publishing or trying to write for a journal, it's developmentally normal to get a revise and resubmit. In fact, it's expected. And I think to get comfortable with that, my metaphor of if you're batting 3 out of 10, you're doing pretty good. So, especially at a journal like JMFT.
Well, and to continue that, therapy compared to writing metaphor, I mean, we all have blind spots, and so you sit in front of your therapist, and your therapist says, "Did you realize you do this?" "No, I didn't." But it's the same with our writing. "Did you realize you left this part out of your document? We kind of need to know about the sample." "Oh, of course you do," or "We need to know about the questions you asked." "Of course you do. I've been with my data so much. I've been with this project so much. I just thought that was evident."
I can't see the forest from the trees, right? I mean, I'm in the bubble of my writing project, and sometimes that outside perspective is important. Steve, you are very busy, but also I feel very accessible and humble. If somebody wanted to get an idea about would this be a good fit for the journal or not, before they actually format, submit, go through all of that, how would they get contact of you, and are you open to that?
Yeah, I'm totally open to that. I can be reached through my email. Email is the best way to reach me, smharris@umn.edu. You can look me up on the University of Minnesota Family Social Science website as well. But yes, send me an email. It's harder to call me at work. I'm not always available to pick up my phone because I might be meeting with students or others in my office. So send me an email. Float the idea by me. Let's arrange for a telephone conversation about it. I'm happy to do all those things.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for joining us today. And maybe we'll have you back. We've talked to one of your colleagues and mentors before, Bill Doherty, and maybe we'll have you and Bill back together talking about something else you're passionate about, your Couples on the Brink project, your discernment counseling, but you're a man of many talents. So thank you so much. And again, if you've listened to this and you've enjoyed what you've heard or a little more curious, very easy to get to JMFT either through Wiley, or again, if you're a member, you want to go to the main page and you can find the direct link to JMFT to see all those virtual issues, the current issues, everything Steve mentioned today. Thank you so much, Steve.
All right. Thanks, Eli. Take care.
Thank you, Steve. I learned a lot. Now let me tell you about my next guest and friend, AAMFT President, Dr. Timothy Dwyer. Tim has a master's degree from Michigan State before going on to get his doctoral degree at Purdue University, which at the time was the bedrock in MFT doctoral education, producing more MFT program directors, faculty members, and AAMFT board members than any other graduate program around, under the expert tutelage of such great MFT educators as Doug Sprinkle and Fred Piercy. Tim has been a faculty member at Loyola University in New Orleans. Also in New Orleans, he was the president of the Louisiana division of AAMFT, helping them in their fight for licensure. He is a past Divisional Contribution Award winner from the AAMFT. He's had 2 terms of service as a general board member before being elected to the president-elect position of AAMFT in 2018. Tim has served as the program director of the MS-MFT program at the Family Institute at Northwestern University. And now he resides in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Please welcome to the podcast, Dr. Tim Dwyer. It's so good to have you here on the AAMFT podcast. I guess the first question we ask every guest is, how did you get into the profession? What turned you on to MFT?
Well, I can tell you the long story or the short story. I'll try to start with the short story and see where it goes. But thank you, Eli. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I had never even heard of MFT until I was in my graduate program in family studies. And it was a research, focused program, but most of the faculty were clinical members of MFT. I remember them coming in with a conference bag that said AAMFT, and I'm like, well, what is that? But really, it was there that I learned that there was this, field, this pathway in mental health that was different than the ones that I had, knocked on the doors of when I was shopping around for graduate school, looking at, I knocked on the door of social work, I knocked on the door of counseling, I knocked on the door of applied sociology.
Tim, you're very youthful. Give us an idea of the timeline. What year are we talking about here?
Started my master's program in 1987. I had never even heard of, I graduated from undergrad in 82, sociology, psychology, so I was always interested in psychological things, but the sociology piece kind of gave me this interest in groups and sort of what happens when people come together. But anyway, my graduate school faculty at Michigan State University were eminently influential to me. I think one of the first books that I was reading in my graduate program, were centered in the handbook. One course I read, we marched through the Gurman and Iskern handbook of marriage and family therapy, reading Pragmatics of Human Communication. And I think what attracted me about that was, one, that there was sort of a language for how they saw the world in this kind of systemic and cybernetic view. And so it felt, there was an intellectual attraction to it, but it also fit a way that I saw the world. And that is that you can't just sort of look inside people and, theorize or make inferences about what their problems are. And that context is, sort of everything. There's this whole way of thinking that fits how I experience the world.
Tim, you attended Purdue University when it was really in the golden age of doctoral training as far as state-of-the-art preparing future MFTs. What was that experience like for you?
Well, Purdue wasn't my first choice. I'll not say the name of the program that rejected me, but it would end up being a fortuitous thing. I could not imagine having found a better program than Purdue for me at the time. And I think you and I both, Eli, I think inherited just some terrific mentors, a terrific legacy of leaders, thought leaders, scholars, researchers, program directors. And I didn't really know that walking into the Purdue program, but what attracted me when I interviewed there were the students. So whenever I advise students, if they're looking at doctoral programs, is don't just look at the faculty, don't look just at location, but look at the students and look at where the graduates go when they complete.
Talk about where your spirit of service starts from.
Well, I think Purdue was sort of the ultimate socialization because every year we had to put together a kind of self-reflective portfolio, not huge, but sort of identifying what activities, engagements, projects we were involved that were leading us to grow, and those were in the areas of research, service and scholarship. Did we go to the state conference? Did we go to the national conference? Did we do extracurricular things? And these weren't necessarily graded things, but it provided a feedback mechanism. And I think it also gave, embedded in me a kind of expectation that that's part of this walk and part of this professional path that I'm on. Seeing my faculty serve as division leaders in Indiana, I think that was sort of I had a little peek of the role of advocacy when Thurana Nelson was on the legislative committee and got certification in Indiana while I was a student there. Well, that was sort of years beyond me. It wasn't lost on me either. So. But I think it wasn't really until I graduated and moved down to New Orleans that I became involved. I sort of committed myself.
Hey, Tim, describe your kind of trajectory to leadership, both on the local level and the national level within the AAMFT.
Some people, not everybody has aspirations of, central leadership role. And I can't say that I did. When I first joined the Louisiana division, I started out as the newsletter editor because I asked the president, what do they need and how can I be helpful? I had been on the ground for about 3 months. But between 1996 and I think I took on a presidential role in the Louisiana division like around 2001. And coming to leadership training, which AAMFT used to hold for division leaders. And I got to interact with the board. And I think, again, Thurana Nelson was on the board. So I've been blessed with really great mentors, but I think I've also sought out models and examples of exemplary professional service. But I think hanging around in those kind of networking circles of leadership, somebody saw something in me and asked me if I'd be interested. And I think many of the steps that I've taken have been out of a willingness to say yes, even though I didn't know what I had to bring. I was willing to sort of find out. So I did my first, in fact, I threw my name in the hat for a board of directors role back in 2005. That was my first election cycle. Went to my first, my first term of service started in 2006. 3-year stint of that, I was off for about 5 months, and then there was a vacated board position, and Linda Schwally, who was the current president then, asked me if I would come back because they needed somebody to be sort of seasoned enough to step right in, skip the orientation and jump right in. I was tired. I was sort of enjoying my, first leg of retirement from board service, but I felt like they called me, they need me. My wife said, well, you got to say yes. So it's been helpful that she's been supportive of my service and really, I think, respected my commitment to that. It wasn't an easy turn to be back on the board as the president-elect. I had 2 previous terms. I threw my name in the hat, and I didn't make the slate. And I was okay with that. I think one of the things I often say to people who are considering board service is you have to do it because you recognize that throwing your name in is a service in itself. And you really help the elections council by giving them a range of, good qualified people for them to consider, because the elections council, which I served as a board appointment for, and two rounds of that, you'll look to sort of compose a constellation of people that bring a lot of different skills and talents and sort of dispositional qualities.
Speaking of leadership qualities, what does a Tim Dwyer bring to the table in that regard?
I think ultimately a willingness to learn, and with that's fueled by a passion for the field. I love MFT. I feel like it's bred in my bones. When students ask me, how did you get into this field? I often say, as the youngest of 5 in my family, I think I was born into it, because that position put me in a place to sort of watch my family, my older siblings leave, sometimes come back, watch the adjustment transitions in my own family. But I think my curiosity, is a skill. My willingness to say yes when asked. My willingness to learn when I may not know, at the get-go. I think this sounds kind of funny. I think I have a kind of essential humility that may not always come out because I'm willing to put myself out there, which takes a certain risk that doesn't always show up as humility. But I think I feel like that's where it comes from. So I feel like I'm a servant leader.
We've known each other for many years now, and I certainly echo your humility and your ability to be one of the people and a servant leader. And that is really what's called for in a job like this, being accessible to the membership. But if I'm listening to this for the first time, I'm just getting involved with AAMFT, or I don't really know what the board does, much less the president. Tell us, what does the AAMFT president do?
But the ultimate job of the president is to be the spokesperson. There are 2 spokespeople for AAMFT. One is the CEO, and the other is the president. And but behind that, the job is to, manage the process. We have a governance leadership model. We have a skill-based governance model. But my job is to sort of manage the board's process, which that sounds rather vague. But we have Robert's rules. We meet 4 times a year. We have an agenda. There's a lot of work that goes into preparing for a board meeting. The president's role is to, in consultation with the CEO and the president-elect, the past president, if there is one that particular year, is to put the agenda together. Those are not things that are done, with impulse or with, a kind of casual sense of preparation. There's a lot of deep thought that goes into those things. The president's job is to appoint, members on the board or members in the association to serve on committees, on task forces, the ethics committee, the various governance units that are not elected positions. It's the board, the president's role to appoint individuals to those particular things. When there is it's really to sort of manage the board to make sure that it's focused on the future, and we have a strategic plan, and it's to make sure that the work and the focus and the effort of the board is in line with what is already articulated in that strategic plan.
Listening to you, Tim, your pathway to leadership was through state divisions, and now since AAMFT has moved to more of a model of topical interest networks, that traditional pathway has been replaced. If you're listening to this and inspired to kind of serve and get more involved in AAMFT, what do you think is the best way to go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Eli. I think, showing yourself, letting people know your interest and willingness. Right now with the network programs, we have the topical interest programs, which there are 8 now in its inaugural year. It's funny because we haven't done a real hard sort of start or rollout of those things. And already people are signing up to those because they're tapping interest that they have. I think, joining those, those didn't come out of nowhere either. There were a handful of leaders and people who were passionate around those topics that wanted to create something and wanted to contribute something. I think an emerging leader who has interest in those would do well to, get to know some of the chair-elect, the treasurer, the secretary, or whoever is involved in the sort of managing and the leadership of those interest networks, and ask how you can contribute, ask how you can be helpful. There are a number of ways to do that, as a volunteer, even as a student, to help spread the word, to help inform people, to help with recruitment and retention, to keep your eyes open for people that have that passion and have that spark and have that curiosity and have a learner-centered mind to want to sort of grow something.
The new AAMFT is all about member choice and member engagement, and we see that reflected in these topical interest networks we've been talking about. I'm curious, in addition to those, what are you the most excited about in the next 2 years during your term as AAMFT President?
This is the inaugural year, and I know that it's been a hard year because people are making the adjustment. I'm excited about kind of helping members, whether they're in geographic areas that are sort of still navigating the transformation from a division structure to this component network structure. I'm excited about seeing those, kind of make the cultural shift in a lot of ways, because it truly is a paradigm shift for the organization. and watching those flourish. I know I'm on the component evaluation committee, which has looked at all of the proposals of the networks that have an idea and want to bring it forth. The geographic networks, I think there are some that were, future focused and keen and clear-minded about what they wanted to accomplish and what they wanted to do in terms of their own efforts, whether it be advocacy, whether it be networking, mentoring, content, consumer-oriented content for their particular division. It's all in service of, advancing the practice in the profession. And so I'm excited about seeing the further evolution of those networks and members really getting a tangible sense of what the possibilities are of those, because it truly is a ground up, sort of opportunity for member engagement, and the opportunity to, pick and choose the things that you want to, and whether you're clicking and joining an interest network because you just want to observe and lurk and sort of see what's going on, or whether there's something that's really driving you to connect. I'm looking forward to new leaders emerging. The new leadership certificate program is another thing I'm incredibly excited about. I remember the days of the old leadership training, and, there was a lot of tension kind of in the mix. I remember as a division leader feeling sort of the anxiety of my, renewal of responsibility to what it took to sort of be an effective leader in those things. And sometimes it was stressful. I see the new kind of leadership model. There's a steep learning curve for a number of things, but there's also an amazing felt sense of support, I think, that they get from staff, that they get from other members, that they get from other networks. The leadership certificate program, though, it's 3 years, I think, or it might be entering its 4th year.
The leadership certificate is a great option for those young professionals that have graduated from their co-AAMFT program, but still feel like they want more polishing in the professional aspects of being an emerging leader, of being a marriage and family therapist.
Well, that's it. I think that they're eminently transferable into a variety of contexts, and whether it's building, your own sort of practice, business in your own setting, or whether it's, functioning at a higher level in your own current context of community agency, or whether you're really keen on, investing those skills into the association. And I think oftentimes having those skills allows a person the flexibility to change, courses and change paths as they grow and as they develop more skills and they see where the applications can really be put to use.
Tim, if I'm a young professional just getting by, paying off my graduate school loans, working my job at a community agency, I might not have a lot of time or extra effort reserved for service. But it's such a foundational part of what we do as marriage and family therapists. Talk about why the spirit of service is so important, no matter where you are and whatever stage of career you're at.
I think, that phrase that you sort of get what you give. And I can tell you, I feel like I have received 10 times what I have given, and it just leads me to want to give more. That may sound kind of cliche, but I think, and I'm not talking about sort of necessarily tangible things, but I think the network of relationships, it really is about relationships. So my service has brought me deeper and a richer and more diverse community of relationships that I've had, and I think knowing people is a tremendous resource, and that's one of the things that sort of continues to feed my interest and my passion in this organization, is because I think the people are extraordinary. in the variety of things that they are committed to and focused on, and there's a great deal of diversity in this organization, and I think that it excites me to accentuate that.
I'm so glad you talk about that, the idea of service and building relationships through service. When I think of my best experiences with AAMFT through the past 2 decades, it's the people I've served with on a local level and on a national level, and those relationships matter. When I come to conferences every year, like the annual conference or the leadership symposium, it's as much to follow up with people I really enjoy as it is to learn things. So service, especially when you're with like-minded people, as you usually are, someone that's going to volunteer their time and skill at that level, it is great for relationship building. And in this profession, relationships matter, as you say. Also, if I'm a young professional and my dollars matter. So it's one thing about serving, it's another thing about belonging. Why is it so important to belong to an organization like the AAMFT?
Because a profession is more than a license. And I know when I was in Louisiana and it was on my watch that we won licensure, and we had an immediate, initial drop in the membership in our region, our division, and that was sort of the message that I was committed to delivering, and I think that because AAMFT is the only association that is advocating and advancing the profession and the practice of MFT, if you love what you do, then I frankly think it should be within our ethical code to give back and to belong to your professional association. I also think, I will just add too, that back in our early days, we were a big tent, a rather exclusive tent, but a big tent, and people came from a variety of pathways. I look forward to a time when people can find their professional home in AAMFT, and they might be coming from a variety of professional pathways. And so,
coming full circle.
Exactly. But in a more integrated and a more holistic, and I think in a more, coherent way, where the systemic, relational, contextual view is the thing that it sort of gravitates us to one another.
Part of being a servant leader and a man of the people, as I was saying earlier, is your availability. And one of the best things about you is that you are always willing to stop, answer a question, correspond with membership in a way that sometimes people think a president doesn't have time for. So Tim is very accessible, as you can tell by his candor on the podcast today, and you should definitely stop by, drop him a line, say hello, and he will tell you about the benefits of being part of AAMFT.
Well, I enjoy being stopped. I enjoy engaging on the fly. I enjoy meeting people who have a question. I enjoy making a meaningful connection. So I encourage people to not see me as unreachable, untouchable, or otherwise too powerful to say hey.
Once again, AAMFT President Tim Dwyer, thank you so much, my friend, for being with us here today on the podcast.
All right. Thanks, Eli. Thanks for doing this project. See you.
So brings to a close another installment of the AAMFT podcast, where we seek to relate, educate, and innovate one episode at a time. We did some relating there with our two current leaders. Thanks again to Steve Harris and Tim Dwyer. I learned a lot. A couple of notes after listening to that interview. I mentioned that all AAMFT members, whether you be a clinical fellow, preclinical fellow, or student, get access through your membership to JMFT. You can find that on the main page of the website at aamft.org. I'm also happy to announce A new partnership, in addition to JMFT, you get access to the Journal of Family Therapy and the Australian and New Zealand Journal of Family Therapy. More great member benefits. Please check that out. Also, like to give a shout out to anyone interested in developing their leadership skills. The Leadership Symposium and the Leadership Certificate through AAMFT are great ways to do that. Also, getting involved in these new topical interest networks, and those are the pathways, as Tim talked about his pathway to leadership, that new leaders and potential future AAMFT board members will emerge from. Have a great time doing this podcast, and we love hearing from you. Please send me an email, communications@aamft.org. Follow us on Twitter. It's at the AAMFT, and I'm at Dr. Eli Live. Until next time, my friends, stay systemic.